Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible come together to fulfill the story of God. I'm Jay.
I'm Fletcher.
And I'm Abby.
And today's story is about Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar.
You got that. You did that.
Yeah.
How far?
I saw your eyes
That far,
before you.
Zophar. Yeah, I was like, I
you
was
read
zoning
those.
in on the, like, what? Okay, how am I pronouncing those? I'm good. I got them.
You got
No
this.
problems.
Yeah.
Not at
So since today's story is about people who give bad advice,
Wait, no. It's about toxic friendships. What are you talking about?
well, it's a bit of both.
Come on, Jay.
It's a bit of both.
We'll see. We'll see.
Abby's trying to tee up a horrible question, though, because they are toxic friends. And so one of the questions that Abby wrote as a suggestion was, who are the toxic people in your life? And we're not doing that, Abby. We're just not.
Jay was
doing
the
that.
only one with an answer.
I did not have an answer. Abby, stop it.
I'm just staying quiet over here. I'm not getting involved.
So today's story is about people who give bad advice. And so what is the worst advice that you have ever been given or heard someone give? Or maybe you've given someone some really bad advice where in hindsight you looked back and you're like, whoa, that wasn't good.
Fletcher is dying to go first for this one.
That was a joke.
All right, Jay, do you want to go first?
Okay, well, when I proposed to Michelle when I was working at Cape and Ray, Quebec, many years ago. So after we got married, we were back in Toronto, and then we moved and we lived there for the past 7 years. So I had like 2 stints. So when I was working there, I proposed to Michelle, and one day I was snowboarding with the director at the time who took up snowboarding at the age of 61. So
Wow.
that's kind of
Wow.
cool.
Impressive.
And we were on the chairlift and we were just talking about the wedding. And he said, Jay, do you know that if you do an outdoor wedding, because we were thinking about doing an outdoor wedding, he said, the way that you can get a free outdoor tent is you can just approach Tim Hortons and you can tell them you're having an event and you would like a tent, and as long as you have it with their name on it, you can have an outdoor tent.
Actually?
Yeah, and
this
so
true?
I was like, this is apparently true. I don't know, maybe it's not. He was the kind of guy he could get free things from anyone.
That's a sweet deal.
Sweet deal, yeah. But do you want a Tim Hortons branded
I don't
wedding?
care.
I wouldn't care if it's free.
Yeah, you're talking to the wrong
Guys,
people
you're
here.
ruining my story. This is
Fletcher-
bad advice. This is
Fletcher and
not
I-
good
cheap.
advice.
I think that's great advice. I thought you were gonna go for bad advice. No, that was really good advice. Fletcher and I are the cheapest people.
You
you'll
didn't
meet.
do it?
No, we didn't do it.
Oh.
I
We
would've
need to figure
totally
out if
done
that's
that.
true. We need to visit a Tim
We-
Hortons.
Who's
and,
getting
find
married?
out. Nobody anytime
Don't
soon.
do
I
it
guess.
for a wedding. Do it for an outdoor event at the church, maybe, or something. But not a wedding, guys. Come on, smart enough.
I would have done it.
I'd put a Tim Hortons suit
Bad
on too.
advice. Bad advice.
I would walk around handing Timbits. It would be great.
Yeah.
Oh.
Instead of the flower petals on the, it's just Timbits all over the ground.
That's oh my goodness! Why didn't I do this, Josh? What were we thinking?
Brutal.
All right,
All right.
that
All right, I thought it was bad advice, guys. I don't know.
Well, we disagree. We think it was
Yeah,
good advice.
Apparently.
All right. Okay. So my piece of advice that's bad advice is actually not all that funny, but it's just the general piece of advice of follow your heart.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
anybody
Yeah.
that says like follow your heart, if I were to follow my heart, I would be 300 pounds because I would be eating so many Oreos and have ice cream every single day.
Yeah.
And it would just not be good.
You're-
Plus, I would probably be depressed all the time because
Yeah. Your heart will lead you astray.
yes.
That is that you do not follow your
Don't
heart.
follow your heart.
That's a
That's
good
such bad advice.
Follow Jesus.
Follow Jesus. That's a good one.
And if your heart aligns with him, then all the better.
Well,
But
he will align your heart with him, but you follow him, I mean, if you really want to follow your heart, but weigh it against Jesus.
yeah.
In which case, you probably often won't follow your heart because it will tell you to do things that are self-satisfying, self-seeking, et cetera,
And will probably make you not feel great later.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the worst advice I've ever heard. All right, Fletcher, do you have any yet?
I have a pretty big piece of bad advice that I received one time, and it was from Jay himself.
What? No, come on.
And it was,
so excited.
you should try this new hot dog place across the street. It's called Chun Chun's, and it has led to a
Life-changing.
crippling Chun Chun's
Wait.
Korean deep fried hot dog addiction.
Addiction.
Wait
there
a
we go, but-
second. I thought you suggested it to Jay.
I don't know. I think it was a mutual thing, but
I
he
think-
said it's really good. Go again, and I said, well, I mean,
I'm
who's going to stop
pretty
me?
sure Fletcher went there first.
Maybe he gave the advice, and I mean,
Maybe I gave the bad advice, and it led to Jay's crippling Chun Chun's addiction.
I've been
Either way.
experiencing victory as of late.
You guys enable each other.
I mean, yeah,
I mean, it's Chun Chun's.
that's so
It's
good.
Oh my.
Chun Chun's, if you want to sponsor this
Yeah,
podcast,
this episode is
please
brought to
reach
you
out.
by Chun Chun's
Fletcher,
Korean
you
Story
should-
at
rice hot dogs.
bfmc.org, Chun Chun's.
There you go.
Wow. So, if you have some bad advice, we'd love to hear your bad advice
Yeah,
because
please.
turns out it might be good advice. Like go
Yeah.
to Chun Chun's.
Or get
Or
a tent
get a
and
Tim's-
get Tim
Tim's
Horton
tent
to
for your
sponsor your
wedding.
wedding.
Yeah, if you're looking for cheap weddings, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it. So reach out to us at Story Fulfilled Podcast or story at bfmc.org. Let us know. So, as always, we encourage you to read the stories that we discuss for yourselves to get the whole picture of what is going on. So, today's story takes place in the book of
Job.
Job.
I don't know how they landed with the pronunciation Job.
It makes zero sense,
No, it really does.
but
Job.
it's
Again,
Job.
pronunciation, not our strong
Pronunciation,
suit. So what
yeah.
the heck do we know?
So we're throwing a bit of a wrench into the timeline of this season because this story takes place in the book of Job, which is set in the time of the patriarchs. So before Moses and the law,
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, but we don't know where in that it actually does. What we do know, like we don't know where it takes place. Interesting note too is that many scholars believe that Job was actually written before the book of Genesis. So pre-Moses, time of the patriarchs, and we do know that at this point sacrifices were used to kind of get things right with God. We know from Genesis in the early chapters that we see Cain and Abel offering sacrifices, Noah, Abraham doing it throughout the book of Genesis. And then in the book of Job, we see the father performing sacrifices for his family, and that was something that was common in that period. And so, the book of Job is placed in the poetry writings section of the Bible, so Psalms and Proverbs, and Job is in there, and it's filled with discussions and poetry that cover the purpose of the book, which is then the source of wisdom.
Yeah, so like we said, the story is set during the time of the patriarchs. So for a historical date, that puts us somewhere before the 15th century. That's when the Exodus kind of probably happened. So it's before that. We have no idea when it actually took place. And also the author of the book of Job is unknown, but
Right.
there's Jewish tradition that puts it to Moses, to Samuel, to Solomon. People like putting authors to things even though it's unknown.
Right.
And then we think that Job is among the older books, like Jay said, even older than the Mosaic books, just
Yeah.
based on the old Hebrew that it uses in some of the manuscripts.
And it mentions the Leviathan
And the
behemoth.
Behemoth.
Mm-hmm.
Not the roller coasters. Yes. Yeah, and so this story is located in the land of Uz. I don't think we hear about Uz anywhere else in the Bible.
Nope.
Yeah,
Just there.
just there. And so it's, again, we don't know for sure where it is, but it's probably in modern-day southwestern Jordan or southern Israel. And then the other location that Fletcher hilariously pointed out was that it's also set in the heavenly courts.
That's right.
In modern-day heavenly courts.
Modern day.
Modern
that's
day
right.
heavenly courts. Those haven't changed.
Well,
You'll
they
see.
might. We don't
Well,
know.
We have
haven't
no
seen
idea.
them.
We don't. It's never been mapped out
No.
Not yet.
that we
Trends
know.
change. Maybe they don't look the same as they were.
Maybe they have
described.
modern heavenly courts
Yeah.
with iPads instead of like tablets. Stone tablets. Sorry.
Fletcher just laughed.
Stone tablets, not iPad tablets. Anyway,
That was good.
so let's start the story before I laugh at my own jokes again. So Job was this wealthy and righteous man from Uz, and he was called blameless, and he feared God.
Yeah.
So one day, God is meeting with his heavenly court, Again, that's the location of the story right now. God is meeting with the angels in the heavenly courts, and the accuser Satan shows up.
Just strolls up.
He just strolls up. He goes, I've been strolling around the
Yeah.
earth, and then God says, have you noticed my servant Job?
Yeah.
He's blameless and righteous and holy and fears me. And Satan says, well, yeah, I've noticed him. And the only reason he fears you is because you've made him rich and wealthy and powerful. And, if he'd take that all away, he's just going to curse you like everybody else does. And God then says, well, let's put him to the test. Let's see if Job will do that. And then he gives Satan the authority to take everything away from Job except to harm his body.
Right.
So Satan goes and does it. He takes away his flocks. He takes away all his possessions, his lands. And then he even ends up letting his children die. So all of Job's, I think, 7 children end up dying.
It's a really he's just kind of sitting there, and then messenger after messenger
Show up.
messenger show up with this horrible news for him.
And only I escaped to tell you is the line. The one messenger escaped to tell him every time. Yeah. So Job obviously is just completely overwhelmed and stricken with grief. And despite his losses in all of this, he said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away.
Yeah.
Praise the name of the Lord. Even after all that, he praises God. He doesn't curse him.
Wow.
Satan then...
I feel like the book could actually stop there.
Yeah.
And that would be just a wonderful lesson.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't.
No.
What
it
about the
continues.
toxic people?
So Satan then goes back to God, and he says, well, if Job loses his health, then he'll curse you. So God gives him the authority to do anything but kill him, essentially. So Job is then cursed with these boils and sores all over his body, these painful, itchy boils and sores. And again, Job doesn't curse God. Even his wife at one point goes, just curse God and die, get it over with.
Yeah.
Like, it's done. Even then, again, Job refuses. He says, should we only accept good from God and not disaster? And it's also phrased as evil or hardship. But even through all this, Job didn't sin with his lips, it says.
Right.
So this is now where we meet the main characters of today's podcast, Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And they start out actually pretty good as friends. They came from their homes, which were a good distance away, and when they saw Job, they ripped their clothes and they cried and they mourned with him. And then they sat with Job for 7 days in silence. They're like, okay, Job, you're going through a hard time. We're just going to sit here with you and not move and not talk to you and not bother you.
See, that honestly, that's what I do. I just don't say anything with people and advice. And that's like sometimes the best thing, though.
Yeah.
People
People need... and
they should have just left it at that. It would have been... They would not have been in this episode, in this season, if they had just sat
left
there.
it and just tried to comfort him.
You could have stayed off the antagonist list.
Yeah.
And good advice for us. Just sometimes people just need you to sit there and
mourn with them.
Listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the next section of the book and moves into chapter 3 is basically it moves into this discussion and debate and poetry on Job and his friends. And so because it's very artistically done and it's very nice and very literary, you go read it and you're like, oh, this is like a cool discussion, cool debate, very nicely written. So go read it if you want to actually see what they're saying. We're going to give you a brief rundown of what happened. So after these 7 days of sitting, Job is actually the first person to speak. And he's just sitting there mourning, and he goes, "Cursed is the day I was born. It's better for me to have not been born than I have to suffer through all this." And his friend's response to Job was basically, well, the only reason you're suffering is because you're a sinner, right? And if we look back to the beginning of the book, we know that Job hadn't sinned. That wasn't the actual reason for his suffering.
Right.
But his friends are like, Job, you're a sinner. You're a sinner. You need to repent. That's what's going on. You've sinned, and that's why all this bad things are happening to you. Job then defends himself and says, know what? I'm righteous. I haven't done anything wrong. There's no reason for me to be suffering like this. Mm-hmm. And then the friends keep on going. They insist, why else would you be suffering? That's the obvious thing, that if you're suffering, you've done something bad. Right. That was obvious to them. Eventually, it comes to this battle of like insults of, who are you? You don't know anything. You're not wise. I'm wise. You're a sinner. And Job goes, no, I'm wise. I know I haven't sinned. you're wrong.
Yeah.
And then it gets to this point, Job really digs in his heels and he goes, I haven't sinned. I don't deserve this. And what he comes to the conclusion is that God is punishing him unfairly. That it's God's fault that this whole thing is happening.
Right.
That he's in the wrong and not Job. And then finally, in the very climax of the book, God actually appears to Job, showing off his ultimate power, and he questions Job on everything. He asks him about his wisdom and power, and what authority do you have? Were you there when, the foundations of the earth were laid? And all these powerful questions that God asked Job. And eventually Job comes to this realization that he was wrong, that he had no right to accuse God of being unfair, and that God's wisdom is just completely beyond his understanding and is almost unquestionable. And then at the end of the book, Job ends up repenting, and he repents for his friends because they had both misrepresented who God was.
Right.
And eventually God blesses Job once again and gives him back everything that he had and more at the end of the story. So that brings us to the question of what the heck happened in that story? What's the point? Like God meets Job out in the field and he basically calls him out for calling God unfair.
Yeah.
And then disappears and Job goes, I was wrong.
Yeah.
And then we never get a settlement to the discussion of who was right, the friends or Job.
Right. Well, I think, and one thing that I wonder about in this story, because it talks about, Job did not sin. And Job, like you said, digs his heels in. I have not sinned. I'm righteous. And God is doing this because I'm unfair, or because he's unfair. And I think that Job misses out on a golden opportunity to ask, have I sinned? Because we don't actually see that throughout the book. And I think that's an important question for us to actually ask as we move forward. The Bible, throughout the law section, talks about sins of omission, right? So there's sins that we commit, and then there's sins that are things that we just didn't think to do, or we didn't think were wrong until we did them. And David has the perfect response for that in Psalm 139, where he says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way." And I think Job misses out on a glorious opportunity to pray that prayer to God and say, God, I don't understand. Show me.
Absolutely.
Show me what, and then
that comes from that especially it comes from the point of view of humility. It's not Job going, I'm righteous, coming from that righteous position.
Right.
It's going, look, if I've done something wrong, show me.
Because who defines righteousness? Not me, not Job, not you, but God. And so God, show me. And if he truly was righteous, which the writer says he was, then God will say, no, Job,
you don't understand.
It's not because of your sin. Keep trusting me. Keep walking in dependence on me. So I think that there's that, and then we got his friends.
Yeah. So basically, the question I had at the end of the book: who was right? Was it Job? Was it his friends? His friends were saying Job sinned. We know that he hadn't. Job knew that he hadn't. And basically, the answer is neither of them were right.
Right.
And it's because they had this preconceived notion that they came in with. They said, if people sin, bad things happen to them, and if they don't sin, good things will happen to them. And that is the belief that they came, this belief that everything has to be fair based on how you act. And the reality of the universe is not that at all.
Yeah.
Bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people.
Yeah.
That's not how the world is structured.
Yep.
So it's this thing called retribution theology. And even though it seems like logical, that's right, that's how things should work, that's not how things work at all. And that's what God ends up pointing out to Job when he shows up. Look, you don't understand what's going on here. I am the creator of the world. I set the world in motion. I know what's going on. I am wise. Don't trust in yourself to understand how the world works. Trust in me.
Yeah.
And I will let you understand it.
Yeah. It's interesting, though. You use the word theology, retribution theology. I like theology. I enjoy reading about it, hearing different theologies that I agree with, theologies that I don't agree with. I love it. But theology in and of itself is a funny word because it's like the knowledge of God. And we know through the Bible that God is actually unknowable in that we can't fully know and understand God. And so no matter what theology we
start
have,
trying to attribute to God.
yeah, we have to understand that it's actually incomplete. There is not a complete theology that understands and systematizes and puts God into a box that we can say this is God. And that's Job's friends' problem. They're like, this is the box.
This is how the world works. This is how God works. This is what should happen.
Right.
And then when it doesn't happen, they can't even accept it. They just yell at Job for being a sinner, even though he's not.
Yeah.
And it just causes a fight between him and his friends. This is how God works, and you're getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And they went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and neither of them were ending up being right.
Yeah.
And the only way that the whole thing comes to a conclusion is Job gets some humility and realizes that he is not the ultimate source of wisdom. His friends aren't the ultimate source of wisdom, but God is the one who has the answers.
Yeah. And the invitation in there is from God. He says to Job, come, let's talk man to man, right? Like I forget exactly what the phrase is, but that's how the verse kind of transliterates. Come, let's sit down and hash this out, mano a mano, and we'll talk about it. And that's the invitation. When we don't understand what's going on, have a conversation with God, and we trust, as you've pointed out here, that God is the ultimate source of wisdom. Even if we don't understand it, He is the source of wisdom. We go to Him. We trust in Him.
Here we go. That's some good stuff. All right. Do we even need to ask the question?
Sure. Well, you always have to ask it. We might just say go back.
We might just say, yeah.
All right. So, how does the story of Job and his friends contribute to the overall fulfilling of the story of God throughout the Bible?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what we just did say, but just ultimately, we need to be seeking God for His wisdom.
Even when we don't understand it.
Even when we don't understand
well,
it.
I think the question, because we talked about bad advice.
Yeah.
And his friends were not giving good advice in any sense. They were just coming from their own, this is what I believe, this is how the world works, and applying it to everything and accusing Job of things he wasn't guilty of. So if your friends are giving you advice, make sure you're not bouncing it on their worldview or your worldview.
Right.
You're bouncing it on God's God's reality, let's say.
Because they may give you good advice.
Yeah.
And they may give you bad advice. And they may give you a mixture of both. And
how do you measure that?
yeah, and the good advice may be situational, where it's good advice today, but next week it's actually going to be bad advice. And so all of it requires bringing it before the Lord.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that's some good advice. We will
Well,
see
good advice. Make sure you read the Bible to see if we're not just making this up.
That's right.
Yes. So send us your bad advice and your good
That's right.
advice, and we will see you all next week.
Thanks for listening.
Bye for now.